there is a lot of flow to what the authors of the Gospels are trying to get us to see. So look at the context. At the beginning of, we'll look at Luke 18 in a couple weeks, but Luke 18 verse 1, he says, then he taught them a parable in order to show them how they should pray. And then he tells the parable about the widow and the judge, and the persistent widow, and she just goes and basically, annoys the daylight out of this judge who could otherwise care less about her, except her persistence ends up paying off. Now, we might not really know exactly, what is the point of that if we had not been told in the context, hey, this next parable is Jesus' attempt to show them that they need to pray persistently. So context is helpful, like any other Bible study methods, context is helpful. Discover the historical background, historical and cultural background of a parable. It is helpful to know, for instance, at the end of Matthew chapter 13, verse 47, again, the kingdom of heaven is like a dragnet. Dun, 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 dun. No, not that kind of dragnet. Some of you don't have any clue what I'm talking about. Do you watch Dragnet? You know what Dragnet? Okay, good. Dragnet, interesting term in that context. Anyway, in this context, it's helpful to know what a dragnet is and how a dragnet was used in that day and what Christ is saying. Why doesn't he just say a net? Why doesn't he just say people are going fishing? What is significant about the use of a dragnet? What does it look like? What is it, most of us when we go fishing, we don't use dragnets. So what's the significance to them culturally? How does that apply to what Jesus is trying to say about the kingdom? So we'll get to that in a couple of weeks, because that's a fascinating one. And a parable has one interpretation but many applications. Getting back to our Bible study, basic Bible study methods, when you approach a passage, and this is a bit of a pet peeve of mine, we often say, well, this passage means to me, it means this to me, it means that to me. Well, guess what? The passage means something to all of us, and it only means one thing. Now, you may apply it differently than I would, than someone would 1,000 years ago, 1,000 years from now, someone in Asia or Africa or America. There's a variety of ways to apply the principle of the passage. But a parable, like just about any other passage of Scripture, it has a meaning. It is an objective meaning. This is not some postmodern, well, it's a relative meaning. No, it has an objective meaning. We need to understand what the text means, and then, we collect all our data, we do all our cultural background, all our linguistic studies, all our exegesis, all our original language studies, and we bring it all, and we come up with a single meaning for this passage that we believe comes from the text, not from us. And then we take that meaning and we say, well, how do we apply that in our situation as a church, as individuals, as a group, as a family? We have a tendency to take a little piece of a parable and apply that to our lives. And when we do that, we usually miss what the parable is trying to say. We want to let the parable speak for itself, get down to the root principle of a parable, and then we'll take that principle and apply it to our lives. Does that make sense? Okay, all right, good. I think you're all on board with that, but I just want to make sure you understand where I'm coming from. Let's look at Matthew 13, 44 through 46. I really want to get deeply into the text, and that was all introduction. Every week when we do this, we will take a passage. We will spend a lot of time in that passage. We'll just try to get to the bottom of a parable, or maybe a group of 2 or 3. We'll spend a lot of time getting deeply into these parables. But let's just, this evening, we'll just kind of have a little fun with this example, or these 2 examples, in Matthew 13, verses 44 through 46. Let me read that for us. The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in the field, which a man found and hid again. And from joy over it, he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant seeking fine pearls. And upon finding one pearl of great value, he went and he sold all that he had and bought it. So I'm going to start by telling you my little, what I call an interpretive summary statement. Again, this is not what I think the passage means. This is what I hope it means. This is what, as far as I can tell, the passage means. And maybe you would word it a little bit differently, but I think if we study it enough, we'll basically come up with, similar kinds of understandings of what the passage means. And this is what I get from this. Something that is worth everything costs everything. So let's go through those three interpretive issues and talk about how do we get that from this passage. Remember, we talked about this context. I've got a leaf in my way from the context is necessary for interpreting parables. So what's the parable? What's the context, rather? We talked about this. The context of the rejection of Jesus by the religious leaders and the beginning of his use of parables. Now, this is about his fifth or sixth parable that is used in Matthew 13, but this is a whole string of kingdom parables. Jesus essentially contends that the one who wants to follow him must give up everything, and that includes rejecting the overriding opinion regarding him that he is satanically inspired. That's what the religious leaders are basically saying. So that's the context here. But even with that context, we still have to understand what does the parable itself mean. Some cultural background on this before we get just into the strict exegesis of it. Treasure. How often do you're digging in the ground and you find a treasure? Well, not very often, but it was probably a little more common in that day. In a land as frequently ravaged as Palestine, many people doubtless buried their treasures. So this is what happens. You know you're about to be invaded. You take all your family treasures, your heirlooms and everything, you bury them somewhere. Let the invading Assyrians, Babylonians, Persians, Greeks, Romans, whatever, come and just take all your stuff. They think they're taking all your stuff, and then they beat you up a little bit. But you know in your mind where your treasure is, you know that it's buried, you know that it's safe. Well, what if they come in and they wipe out you and your family and everybody, and that treasure's sitting there? Well, eventually, there's a good chance that someone may come and find it. So apparently this happened once in a while, but like one comment, like D.A. Carson goes on to say here, but to find a treasure like this, a significant treasure, would happen once in 1,000 lifetimes. So it's not uncommon, it's not unprecedented that this would happen, but to find one as valuable as the one described in verse 44 is pointing to a very high value of the treasure that you're looking for. A little bit of cultural background on verse 45. Look at verse 45 again. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant seeking fine pearls. The man in verse 45 is a professional pearl seeker. This is what he does. Now remember, they weren't, their economic system is based on precious metals or precious goods. They didn't have, paper money. Their coins were all silver or gold. So, to be a pearl seeker is to be someone basically who is looking for valuable things. His job is to find pearls. That's not pearls, that's pearls. In obscure places. Thus, if he finds one, so if he finds one that is worth selling everything for, that speaks not merely to the pearl's perceived value, but to its intrinsic value from the perspective of an expert. You and I, we might look at something and say, oh, that's so valuable. An expert would say, I've seen better. Well, this expert looks at this pearl and he says, this is why I got into the business. I mean, I'm going to sell everything. There is nothing that I have that could be possibly as valuable, including the totality of everything that I have, that is as valuable as this pearl. Now, is that a sustainable lifestyle? Is that logical? Jesus doesn't care about any of that. That's not the point of this parable. The point is he sees something that is so obviously of great value that he's willing to give up everything he has to attain that. And that's what Jesus is trying to say the kingdom of heaven is like. Because we have these two in parallel, we're going to do kind of a fun little thing as we do some exegesis of this, and we're going to, okay, I got a couple more minutes. We're going to do some comparison and contrast. We're going to look at some similarities. I think that's the next thing. Yeah, some similarities between these two parables in verses 44 and the one in verse 45 and 46. By the way, I did do this. I looked at them and basically went word for word in the Greek. You know, what are the similarities and what are the differences? And if I would have taken another hour, I might have found even more differences and similarities. But here's some of the basics. Both begin with this: the kingdom of heaven is like. It's verse 44. The kingdom of heaven is like this. And then verse 45, the kingdom of heaven is like this. Now, what you need to keep in mind, and we'll see this as we go through these kingdom parables, when it says the kingdom of heaven is like, it doesn't mean the kingdom of heaven is like the next element. It's not necessarily saying the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure. It's saying the kingdom of heaven is like the following situation, in which there's a treasure, and there's, you know, a man found it, and he buries it, and the kingdom of heaven is like this entire circumstance. In fact, verse 45 says, again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant. No, it's not like a merchant. It's like a merchant who is doing this and doing. You could almost put little, you almost put the entire thing in a parenthesis and say the kingdom of heaven is like equals everything in the parenthesis. Does that make sense? It's not just like that one next element. So this is a similarity. Both begin with the kingdom of heaven is like. Both feature something valuable. Both involve an individual. In verse 44, you have the kingdom of heaven is like hidden treasure in the field which a man found. A man, a generic man, a person. What do we know about this person? Well, nothing. Because who he is or what his background is or anything about him. Is he a workman? Is he working for someone else? None of that is relevant. Same thing with the merchant. All we know about the merchant is that he's seeking fine pearls. I think it's interesting, though, and everything you see in the New Testament that talks about the body or the plurality of people, you know, the whole congregation, the whole group of people. In fact, we'll look, as we go through 1 John, we'll see a lot of passages that we usually individualize, and therefore we come up with the wrong interpretation of them. We look at, you know, you are anointed with the Spirit, and we say, oh, I am anointed with the Spirit. Well, actually, it's you plural, meaning the whole group of you. All of us, as a community, not just one individual person, is what the text says. But here, it's an individual. There is a man. There is a merchant. So what does this mean? It means that each of us have an individual relationship to Christ and an individual relationship to the kingdom. Certainly that relationship is related to those around us in church or in our family or whatnot. But whether we're going to pursue the kingdom, whether we're going to put it first in our life, is a decision that we each individually have to make. We can't make that decision for someone else. We can't ride someone else's coattails spiritually. We need to pursue the kingdom on our own. Or we reject the kingdom on our own. Excuse me. Both involve an individual. A couple more similarities. Both use the word to find. Now that's interesting. They both use the word to find. It's the word eurisco, or the participial version of it, euro. These are individuals who are finding something. We'll look at the differences in how they're used, but essentially, both men are finding something. Both portray the purchaser selling all. In fact, if you want to underline a couple of words, you could see in the English, sells all that he has in verse 44. Sold all that he had in verse 46. So what's the point? The point is that there's one thing that they want. It costs everything that they have, but they don't care about the everything that they have relative to the one thing that they want. That one thing is the kingdom. And they're willing to set everything behind them and lose everything and give up everything for the sake of pursuing the kingdom.